Welcome to The Future Unleashed from Lincoln College, Oxford, the new series that aims to talk us through the next few decades of human development in different spheres of activity with the help of some of our most distinguished alumni. I'm your host, Helen O'Hara, and joining me today is David Walcott, who is the founder and managing partner at Novamed. There, David invests in and consults on research that aims to improve healthcare, especially in emerging markets around the world. David is a Rhodes Scholar who came to Lincoln for his master's and stayed on to do a DPhil in clinical medicine. Since turning from medical practice in towards medical investment, he has worked on corporate governance with the Wharton School and has sat on the board of advisors of UCL's Global Business School for Health. To set the scene, today we are in the lower senior common room at Lincoln, which was established in 1662. Just for fellows. This used to be stocked with luxuries like snuff and, of course, copious amounts of alcohol. And at one point, Lincoln Fellows were actually reprimanded for spending too much time here and not enough time in Hall next door. So it's a welcoming place to be. David, how does it feel to be back?
Thanks, Helen. No, it feels good. It feels good. It feels quite the same, but quite different. Fortunately, less snuff and alcohol than in days past, but it's good to be here.
So tell us about sort of your path since then. You went into medical practice and then you sort of stepped away from that kind of daily medical practice, if you like, into a role that tries to look at things, I guess, more systematically.
It was a very circuitous path. First thing I'll say, initially I was purely in clinical medicine, and that was the sort of beaten path for me back in Jamaica where I did medical school. I decided to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship and ended up here doing a master's in immunology and then extended that into a DPhil in clinical medicine. And from that point, that was a sort of inflection point because the DPhil showed me the value of reflecting. And during that 3 to 4 year stint, I was able to reflect and engage and explore in a very open-ended way. And that set the tone for further exploration beyond Oxford. That sort of led me into the investment world. And ultimately, I decided to sort of try to start our own McKinsey of healthcare in emerging markets because I felt there was a need that sort of was very potent in emerging market healthcare problem solving. And the experience garnered by that led me into the investment world. So it was a sort of fortuitous stumbling through until, here we are back at Lincoln.
So what was it that made you look at particularly the business, the investment side of healthcare as a means of sort of solving problems?
So I've always felt that doctors make poor business people. But on the flip side, I've always felt that the business community doesn't quite understand healthcare. And so especially in emerging markets, what I was seeing that a lot of the large healthcare businesses weren't truly healthcare business models. There were large pharmacy chains, there were large medical supplies businesses, but these are retail and distribution business models. The actual delivery of care, healthcare services, these businesses tended to not perform very well. And so I felt like there was a need to focus on healthcare services in underserved populations and emerging markets broadly. There's a sort of expertise moat around being able to create value in these assets that many traditional investment houses don't quite understand.
So we're here today to talk about the future of global health. So what are the trends that you see shaping that as a whole? It's a big question.
It's a big question, and there's a big answer. But I think the world is changing rapidly, both in terms of the healthcare market and the healthcare tools we have at our disposal. On the market side, we're seeing changing demographic trends, which is the sort of biggest problem I think we have with or global aging. In East Asia, over 30%, if not in this decade, in the next, of the population will be over 60, 65. And in Latin America, it's the most rapidly aging region in terms of the sort of growth of the aging population. So that is going to stress the healthcare system. And so we're seeing distressed healthcare systems globally, and that is going to increase. On the tool side, fortunately, there are many sort of technologies that are emerging and sort of revealing their value in healthcare. The easiest one that comes to mind is AI, but that is just a microcosm in the sort of larger pool of digital technologies that are increasingly revolutionizing healthcare. I think climate and health is going to generate a potent discussion in the days to come, and we'll see migrating patterns of diseases or sort of ability to manipulate data towards healthcare increases. We'll see more and more precision and personalized medicine. And so I think there are all these headwinds, despite the sort of challenging forces that we're facing. There are these positive headwinds that I'm hoping we can navigate to not only increase the net quality of health, but to reduce sort of health inequity around the world.
Okay, there's a lot there that I want to unpack, but let's talk a little bit about, which are the most sort of pressing issues then? Is it this aging population that is the most sort of, the biggest problem to solve and most immediately?
I would say the biggest problem to solve really is health inequity. Because, if we look at how healthcare resources are allocated, over 70% of the world's population lives in emerging markets with perhaps only 10% of healthcare resources. And it starts from the primary care level. And so I think all problems are downstream of health inequity. If we look at aging, there is a significant level of inequity in aging. If we look at our healthcare AI tools, digital health has the ability to revolutionize healthcare. But if it's only accessible to few, it's going to increase health inequity. And so I think the sort of central unit of reference really should be how do we right size the health inequities that exist. I think that is the single biggest problem that exists.
So what are the challenges then in doing that? Because you've talked about there was a need for someone like you to come along, set up something like Novamed and look at this specifically. So is it getting people to take that seriously?
It is getting people to take it seriously, and I think there is a sort of traditional perspective, which is to say that healthcare in developing economies does not create viable business models, and so we're here to disagree and disagree vehemently because the population and the healthcare needs in developing economies are increasing and will continue to increase with our aging populations, and two, we have technological tools that can drive greater healthcare impact per unit input. And so, we're able to do more with less. And so I think considering the sort of new sort of innovative tools that we have at our disposal in the face of increasing healthcare needs, compounded by a reduced fiscal capacity around the world to serve these healthcare needs, I think there's a greater role for an efficient private sector to deliver healthcare, and that is where we have decided to focus.
Can you give us some specifics? How can innovation then help sort of solve some of that inequity?
So there are many ways. For me, I sort of think of innovation as not just new tools, but new processes. And so I think a lot of the learning curves that have been climbed in the developed world can be applicable to emerging markets. Things like, what are best practices for the org structures and the sort of operational workflows in healthcare organizations that can be simply replicated. So that is one. But also on the tools side, there are many tools, including AI, that can be used to significantly increase the efficiency of organizations, increase the sort of diagnostic capacity. If you look at, for example, reading x-rays. In many emerging markets, there's a shortage of healthcare workers, including radiologists. But if you're able to sort of apply technology to the diagnostic process, you're able to sort of have more x-rays read per unit time, right? And so a lot of the human resources side falls short in emerging markets, can be served with technology.
That's amazing, because there's been a lot of concern recently about the use of AI, in the arts, in the media, things like that. But it feels like things are then very different in medicine. Like there's a much more concrete, specific use for a lot of forms of AI.
There are many uses, absolutely. There's lots of healthcare data that is unstructured, and of course, this is assuming that data is protected, and which is important for us to maintain responsibility and ethical fidelity in using data. But the AI can be used to increase diagnostic capacity. That is the sort of easiest paradigm for its use in emerging markets where there are general diagnostic shortfalls. It also has predictive capacity, which again is useful in allocating resources, both at a public sector and a private sector level. And sort of technology on a broader scale serves as somewhat of an amplifier of healthcare resources. And there are many examples. I mean, in COVID was really a sort of petri dish for how we can leverage technology in solving, healthcare needs. And for example, in Brazil, telemedicine was the only means by which healthcare services could have been delivered to lots of these tribes in the Amazon. Right? And there are many such examples of leveraging telemedicine to serve the last mile. But I think we're at a point in this world's life cycle where we have been battle tested with COVID, and now the sort of onus is on us to harness these learnings and apply these learnings towards reducing health inequity.
So in terms of that sort of predictive role for AI, can you explain that a little bit more? Is that sort of population trends, or is it a little bit more specific than that?
So all of the above. All of the above. I mean, what AI allows for in sort of predictive modeling around healthcare can be applied to individuals. It can be applied to large populations. There are individual healthcare tools that can allow you to make intelligent, data-driven decisions about in your everyday life that harnesses your biological data, your behavioral data, and actually instructs you on a day-by-day basis as to what the optimal actions you should take are to increase longevity.
Wow.
But on the flip side, there are these tools that look at trends and data on a population level and can predict, and in so doing allow for efficient allocation of resources. I mean, AI even allows us to simulate different population-wide healthcare phenomena by creating these digital twins of islands, and of course this can influence policy and decision making. So it's an extremely potent tool, almost a superpower.
Yeah. So what are the limitations of that? What can it not do currently?
There's this sort of adage, garbage in, garbage out. And so I think it's able to do a lot with what it's fed. But if it's not fed responsible or balanced data, it will produce irresponsible or imbalanced output, which is how the sort of entire conversation around algorithmic bias comes in, right? And so I think what it cannot do is it cannot produce a responsible answer if it's not fed responsible information. And so what we're seeing is, because there is a skew in the healthcare data we have towards certain populations, the sort of output is skewed towards these populations. And so one of the big sort of mandates we have is to improve the applicability of healthcare tools by harnessing and leveraging more diverse data points.
So does that involve, essentially funding or helping fund research around the world, and not maybe just in, let's say, the US or Europe, where a lot of medical research has been focused?
Absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. It involves sort of tapping into these, what we call research deserts. Mm-hmm. And of course, while we're an investment firm, and I still am a scientist at heart, and I spent over 5 years here being a scientist. So we still do lots of research. But our sort of mandate is to drive research in the global south and to bridge the sort of north-south divide. And so we believe strongly in essentially right-sizing the world's global data lake to include more data from underserved populations.
So this whole thing about, high-tech possibilities, I guess, for the future of healthcare, I think historically there's been some cases, I'm thinking mostly about the US, where high tech has meant more expensive. So can high tech healthcare also be more affordable healthcare for these emerging markets?
So again, this is a question with a nuanced answer. So I think it depends on the sort of high tech tool, but from a conceptual basis, the costs of technology decrease per the sort of scale of the market. And so if these high-tech tools are applied across a broad scale of a broad population, it's very likely that it will be cost efficient. And so if we look at, AI, right, these sort of large language models were very expensive to develop. But because they have utility across such a broad population, it reduces the individual costs, right? And so I think for tools that have some sort of a ubiquitous level of applicability, those are the most likely to reduce the cost structures of care, both in the developed and developing world, whereas the more sort of maybe idiosyncratic, personalized medicine tools that by definition are applicable to a small group, I think those unfortunately will increase health inequity, but at least it sort of paves the way as to what is possible, and it gives the scientists the question to answer, which is how do we get this at scale, right? And it was the same with the World Genome Project, right? Initially, genomic sequencing was terribly expensive, but now it's you could have your, you could get it done for $100, right? So I think, while these kind of high-tech tools increase inequity in the short term, they pave the way for further work to be done to reduce their cost structures.
So there's almost a scenario then where some of these emerging markets almost skip a middle stage and go straight to the high-tech solution.
Absolutely. So there's that sort of leapfrogging phenomenon, which, the best example is not really a healthcare example, but it's applicable to healthcare, which is Kenya with M-Pesa, their sort of fintech tool that allowed for mobile transactions. And if I'm not mistaken, Kenya was a sort of global leader in this sort of mobile money when M-Pesa was founded years back. But what that has done is given the underserved population in Kenya the ability to transact. And with the ability to transact comes the ability to create value in different ways, including in healthcare. And so Kenya's sort of digital healthcare economy has increased by virtue of this sort of foundation of being able to transact for value. And I think that is perhaps the best example of leapfrogging one can give.
So what are the sort of the existential threats then, I guess? I mean, you mentioned climate change, for example, as something that's coming up. We've obviously just had a pandemic. Are these the kind of things that doctors are trying to get ahead of, I guess, right now?
There are quite a few. I would say antimicrobial resistance is one of the scary ones because, for decades we have benefited from having these tools that somehow kill harmful organisms but don't kill us, right? But now we're running out of antibiotics. And so the search is on to find this sort of new class of drug that is able to essentially do what antibiotics did. And so that is sort of touted as the single greatest healthcare threat because in the pre-antibiotic days, that is when we had these sort of mass epidemics, endemics, pandemics, and it would be a very scary thought to return to a world where there are superbugs that cannot be contained. That is sort of number one, or very high up on the list. There's also the, again, pandemics, which COVID sort of reminded us that pandemics do exist in this new modern world. But there are other sort of groups of diseases that are getting more real estate in the global conversation. And I think a big one for us to double click on is mental health, because if I'm not mistaken, depression is, I think the projection was in the next 30 to 40 years, it will be the most common disease. And of course we have anxiety, which affects again a high population of maybe 1 in 4 individuals walking around, right? And so it's going to be important for us to also address this sort of invisible phenomenon of healthcare diseases. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that we're very likely to experience a mental illness pandemic, just based on the sort of rising levels of anxiety, rising levels of depression, reduced levels of social connection, increased levels of individual insularity. I mean, there are all these sort of headwinds we have to contend with, some of which are related to technology, that are sort of driving global destabilization of mental well-being.
I mean, it's fascinating that you mentioned that because, of course, I think the pandemic seems to have accelerated some of that insularity, some of that isolation, some of that maybe overdependence on technology to interact with the world. So it feels like we have to address a new pandemic, if you like, coming out of the old one.
In as much as we had this sort of natural experiment to sort of drive technology forward, I think it really dealt a blow to our collective mental health status. Think of, we're all social creatures, right? And so we're forced to sort of remain isolated in these walls, and beyond the isolation, there is this kind of pervasive angst about what COVID is, what COVID does, what vaccines do. And so it drove a level of anxiety that I think we're yet to recover from, in addition to the sort of loneliness. And we just weren't able to really exercise our humanity. Even sort of simple things like, being able to attend funerals to celebrate the life of a loved one. It really dealt a large blow, and I think we're going to see the effects for days to come, especially in the young population that have never been through this before, and for which social interaction is a critical part of their development.
And it is a fascinating thing because on one hand, technology, social media, the media generally has enabled us to find our tribes in some cases, and people who might have been isolated at home have found their people, and equally it doesn't compensate for actual human contact, maybe.
It doesn't compensate for actual human contact, and if you look at even the happiest societies in the world are societies where there is a level of frequent, light human contact. I mean, we're all sort of mirrors of each other, right? And so it can be very psychologically destabilizing if you're sort of left on this island. Secondly, while the technology allows us to connect to our tribes remotely, it also exposes us to tribes that we may not want to connect to, right? And so it while it's valuable if you're sort of aligned with individuals who have the same values as you, you're also able to influence by forces that are very difficult to control. And again, we're social creatures. We absorb wisdom from each other, right? And so it's one of those tools where the glass is half full on one hand, because we're able to connect and we're able to engage each other's humanity, but there is a danger. There's a sort of Pandora's box that we need to try to not open.
And talk to me about climate change then as well, because we're hearing about malaria maybe spreading north and extending its range, things like that. Is that going to sort of change the pattern of illnesses? Is that something that people have to start preparing for in a way?
Absolutely. And ironically, it also has a mental health focus. I mean, there was somewhat of a phenomenon where young people were feeling the pressure to respond to climate change and feeling angst that their predecessors weren't taking it seriously, and that drove an increase in mental illness. In terms of sort of specific illnesses, of course, infectious diseases like malaria, mosquito-borne diseases are have started to migrate and will continue migrating. Heat-related illnesses, and we're seeing this in the US, we're seeing this in India. I think the incidence of heat stroke increased by just under 2x over the past few years. And so I think it's one of those invisible cuts. You know, there's that phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. It's those sort of 1,000 individual cuts where we're seeing the migratory pattern of these diseases increase ever so slightly. We're seeing just an ever so slight increase in heat stroke. But when we look back 10, 15, 20 years in the past, you see the sort of extent to which this group of diseases has increased. And so I personally think the climate and health is a conversation that is not being had enough. Organizations like the Wellcome Trust are really leading, you know, the dialogue, but I think, you know, it really should be one of these sort of global pillars of discussion in what healthcare needs to look like in the days to come.
Well, let's try and, you know, be a little bit more optimistic again for a minute. So, you know, past innovations that have kind of transformed healthcare, you know, things like germ theory, you know, the creation of vaccinations, the discovery of penicillin. Are there discoveries that you can sort of see or sense might be coming that could have a similar sort of quantum leap forward in healthcare?
If we look at sort of human history, there were these sort of revolutions, the Industrial Revolution, etc. I think that we are at the cusp of a spectrum of healthcare revolutions, including gene editing, biotechnology known as CRISPR, where we're able to actually modify genetic structures that are related to certain diseases. And so, of course, gene editing has been approved by the FDA for certain disorders, but that number of disorders will only continue to increase. And beyond that, we have, you know, obviously AI and the ability to really leverage data to drive outsized clinical outcomes and greater diagnostic capacities and therapeutic capacities. We have things like augmented and virtual reality, which can really simulate environments that will be useful in treating mental illnesses, etc., amidst a range of other digital therapeutics for mental illness. And so I think what underpins all of this is a sort of fourth industrial revolution where our biological and physical spheres are increasingly converging. And I think the sort of next generation of healthcare tools will stem from this.
I wanted to ask, I mean, we are back here at Lincoln, you know, so how did your time at Lincoln kind of shape some of the way you approach your career now, the way you've started thinking about these things since you went into it?
So when I came to Lincoln, I was planning to spend 1 year. I ended up spending 5. So I suppose I enjoyed my time here. You know, I think for me as a medical doctor from Jamaica, in a sort of very traditional profession, you know, if you're smart, you go into law, medicine, engineering. I came for a master's, which again didn't give me much time to reflect. But when I was inspired to do my DPhil, that decompression in my academic journey gave me the latitude to explore. And I think the exploration was the single most important thing personally in my career. I was able to explore professionally. I was able to explore linguistically, which opened opportunities to engage these markets that I never would have imagined engaging. And a lot of that was nurtured here, you know, sitting down, speaking to people who are doing radically different, just living in radically different worlds from me. It can't help but open one's mind. Even just last night when I was at high table dinner, I was speaking to an archaeologist who was unearthing these sort of Roman artifacts. And I mean, these are the sort of things that broaden your mind and that remove you from this increasingly hyper-capitalistic world that we're sort of living in. And I think that sort of ability to disconnect and to create space between myself and what was received wisdom as a profession allowed me to, one, introspect, and two, gave me the risk tolerance to be able to explore questions that had no clear answer, which ultimately led me to this sort of career I'm pursuing. So I do have to credit Lincoln with really just allowing me that latitude and giving me that support while, trying to figure out a question that had no answer.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, we are focusing on the future here. So do you have advice that you would give young people at Lincoln or coming to Lincoln now, just starting out in their careers as I guess, future stewards of the planet?
One of the things I enjoy doing most is speaking to young people, because I think, one, they have so much energy, and it's important to find a source of energy for me, but also there are so many forces that are seeking to destabilize young people now, and one of which is this sort of achieve it now mentality. And I think one of the key things that I would say to any young person is just to be patient. The world is spinning, it will continue to spin, and you can speed up your days today, but it's very likely you'll speed up your life. Right? And so it's important to find that balance between being goal-directed and goal-oriented and embracing the sort of serendipity that can only come with patience. And so that is the sort of first nugget I would share. And if they're finding it difficult to do so, I just invite them to Jamaica, where they have to slow down. Right? Secondly, I think it's important for everyone to find their why. If it even is the case that you're not clear on what your what is, find something that wakes you up in the morning. It doesn't have to. It can take time, and it will take time. But I think it's important to develop that internal engine of desire and purpose. That often only comes with introspection, but that is what is gonna sort of give you a fulfilling and fulfilled life. Because I think when you're connected to purpose, your world is radically transformed. It took me years to find my purpose, but the sort of energy, the sort of gratification you get from aligning yourself with what you believe to be your life's purpose, I think is one of those things that is not just important, but necessary for a fulfilled life. And I think both of those things go together. Be patient and sort of align yourself with purpose. Find your purpose. Those are the two things that I would leave with young people.
I think that can be something that overachieving, very driven, or I should say high achieving, perhaps not overachieving, but very driven young people like those at Lincoln probably need to hear. I certainly did at that age.
No, absolutely. And your purpose can be, it doesn't have to be something that is sort of one of these kind of traditional ivory tower, aspirations. It can be something that is very simple, that connects you to a mission. When I had my biggest decisions to make, what cemented my purpose for me was understanding that there are a few of my family members who fell ill, and they fell ill and weren't treated well because the healthcare systems were inadequate. And that is what connected me to my purpose. It wasn't sort of this kind of overly flamboyant mission. It was something as simple as realizing that the people who I care about remained vulnerable, and there was evidence of this vulnerability. And so I think those things can only come with reflection and introspection. And so, whenever I speak to young people who are keen to explore their professional, trajectories, one, I tell them to just remain open-minded, but to just reflect on their lives, because there is much to be learned from the experiences you've lived.
The last question, this is possibly difficult or possibly easy, I'm not sure. But how would you describe Lincoln in 3 words?
One, I would say, I'm trying to not say magical, but I have to say magical because that's the first word that came to mind when I came back and was wondering if this was Lincoln or Hogwarts. So magical is one. 2, I would say homey, because there is so Lincoln, I suppose, not being one of the massive colleges in Oxford, has this family orientedness and this sort of community spirit that I think lends itself well to both a grad and undergrad experience, because you really feel a home. And I think certainly, especially for international students coming here, it's important to feel a sense of belonging that can only come with somewhere that sort of values that type of environment. And third, I would say a picturesque. I mean, I've been taking photos constantly since I've come back, and it's not the first time I'm seeing the grounds, but it really is a beautiful space. And why I think that is important is I think the space we exist in and the level of dignity that that space conveys inspires a certain level of comportment from us. And so even for me, I've never seen such beautifully manicured lawns, etc., despite coming from Jamaica. And I remember when I came, I would sit down in the grounds and I would just read, and I'd be on my laptop, and it was so serene, but it wasn't just serene, there was an order to the beauty that I think inspired me to dignify my presence here with my best work.
That's beautifully said. David Walcott, thank you so much.